In the vast stretches of time before civilization, before cities, before the written word, there were people. They were not primitives in the way we often imagine, nor were they idle savages grunting through a joyless existence. They were human, fully, deeply, and instinctively human, and like us, they craved more than just survival. They hunted to eat. They gathered to live. But when the spears were laid down and the bellies were full, what then? What did cavemen do for fun? To answer this question, we must journey not only across ancient landscapes, but through the very heart of what makes us human. Because hidden beneath layers of dust and stone lies something timeless, the universal desire to play, to laugh, to celebrate, and to connect. It's easy to reduce the lives of early humans to a simple struggle for existence, to picture them forever chasing prey, braving cold winters or fending off predators. But this view is not only incomplete, it's deeply misleading. Modern archaeology paints a more nuanced picture. Our ancestors, whether Homo sapiens or Neanderthals, didn't just live, they thrived. They organized communities, formed complex social bonds, and developed rituals, tools, and technologies that went far beyond what was strictly necessary for survival. And in this space between the hunt and the hearth, something extraordinary happened. They began to play. But what did play look like for a species without electricity, books, or even permanent homes? The answer begins with the very thing that allowed us to become who we are: the mind. The human brain is not wired solely for logic and calculation. It's wired for stories, for music, for curiosity and creativity. Neuroscientists today recognize that imagination is not a luxury. It is a core function of human cognition. And that imagination is not new. Cave paintings that stretch back more than 40,000 years, crafted in the deep, silent recesses of rock shelters, suggest that early humans were not just expressing their world, they were reimagining it. The bison and horses on the walls of Chauvet and Lascaux weren't drawn out of necessity. They were drawn out of something deeper. These weren't mere illustrations. They were visions, possibly prayers, possibly dreams. And behind each painting was a ritual, a moment, a gathering of minds in the dark. There may have been singing, there may have been dancing, there may have been laughter echoing against the stone. This was not work. This was not survival. This was fun. Play is a physical thing. Even today, children learn about the world through movement, by running, chasing, tumbling, pretending. Archaeological evidence suggests our ancestors did the same. Children's footprints discovered in ancient cave sites tell a story of playfulness. In one site in southern France, tiny footprints were found alongside torch marks deep in the caves, implying that children explored these underground worlds not out of fear, but fascination. In some places they danced, literally. Circles of footprints show patterns that suggest rhythmic movement, jumping and spinning. It is easy to see these moments and think of them as childish, but they speak to something profound. These children were not merely passing time, they were exploring their world through joy, and their parents weren't far behind. Many hunter-gatherer societies today still engage in communal games, racing, wrestling, and mock hunting contests. There's no reason to believe our ancient ancestors were any different. These games weren't distractions, they were essential. They built strength, taught skills, and reinforced bonds, but most importantly, they were fun. Tens of thousands of years before the first written language, before the first wheel or the first plow, music existed. In the hills of modern-day Germany, archaeologists uncovered delicate flutes carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory, some over 40,000 years old. These instruments, finely crafted and tuned, could only have existed in a culture where sound was cherished, practiced, and enjoyed. These were not tools of survival. These were instruments of celebration. And where there is music, there is dance. Where there is rhythm, there is community. Even today, the sound of drums has the power to unite people in motion. It's a power that transcends language, geography, and time. We may never know the exact songs our ancestors played, but the fact that they made music at all tells us something vital. They made time for joy. Long before the printed page, stories lived in voices, in faces lit by firelight, in words passed down not for utility, but for wonder. The campfire wasn't just a source of warmth or light, it was a stage. There, in the flickering shadows, elders spoke of ancestors, spirits, monsters, and stars. They told stories of the hunt and tales of the unknown. These weren't mere survival lessons. They were adventures, myths, and mysteries. They were entertainment in its purest form, and as the stories unfolded, listeners were transported. Eyes widened, jaws dropped. Laughter echoed, fear crept in, and through it all, bonds deepened. This was fun rooted in meaning, leisure that shaped identity, a ritual as old as humanity itself. To see our ancestors only as brutes is to miss the miracle of their humanity, because deep in the caves, beneath the stars, and around the fire, they danced, they laughed, they played, they sang, and they told stories. They may have lived in a world of danger and uncertainty, but they still carved out moments of joy. And in doing so, they left us a legacy, not just of survival, but of soul. What did cavemen do for fun? They lived, they celebrated, they dreamed, and this is only the beginning. While our Stone Age ancestors were making cave paintings, clubs, and, well, caves, they weren't just working all the time. They had to take a break at some point. But what did these ancient humans do for fun? What could they even do before there was such a thing as TV or the internet? Well, it turns out they actually played games and had a good time in their own ways. In fact, researchers have been able to piece together evidence that suggests cavemen had a lot of fun, and it wasn't too different from us in some ways. So here's what we would probably have in common with cavemen if we ever met one. Games. Kids today can be glued to their screens playing video games, but this is nothing new. As long as there's been leisure time, there's been games. And researchers believe cavemen had fun by playing games too. One example comes from Switzerland, where archaeologists found a board game that dates back 32,000 years. It's called the Board Game of the Sun. The pieces are shaped like animal bones and are marked with symbols. We don't know exactly how it was played since no written rules were left behind, but archaeologists believe it involved throwing dice made of knuckle bones. Sounds kind of similar to other games that involve dice, right? Probably because games that rely on chance are a common way for people to have fun throughout history and across cultures. And while board games may not be everyone's idea of fun, the caveman equivalent of hide and seek was likely pretty popular. Kids hide while the seeker counts to 10, except instead of counting to 10, the seeker would probably count the seconds by throwing stones into a body of water and then seeing how many ripples it took to reach the shore. Hide and seek has also been called the fundamental game of childhood because most kids will play it whenever they have the chance. And anthropologists think this game goes back thousands of years, but cavemen probably didn't just play games while on the ground. Hunting and gathering food required constant vigilance, and climbing trees was both necessary and dangerous. So maybe it's not surprising that cavemen also enjoyed a good game of tag. Except instead of saying, "Tag, you're it," the words might have been more like, "Beware the tiger." Because in order to avoid being tagged, players would have to climb higher up the tree, which may have led to an accidental leap from branch to branch. Eventually, someone would fall to the ground and become the new it and try to climb the tree themselves. In this way, tag became a part of training for real-life situations, and in general, playing games helped young cavemen practice important skills like hunting and climbing. Bonds. Being human isn't easy. There's always something that needs to get done. Food needs to get gathered. Shelter needs to get built. So it's important for humans to bond with each other so we can work together and accomplish more than we could alone. And anthropologists believe cavemen found ways to bond with each other through activities that seem kind of silly. One example comes from France, where a caveman drew pictures of animals on the wall about 14,000 years ago. But he wasn't just drawing any animals. He was drawing animals dancing. Could this have been a kind of silly game? Researchers aren't sure, but they do have a theory. They believe the caveman drawings show an early form of a ritual that later developed into what we call a mime or pantomime. Basically, it's a performance where the characters don't speak and instead communicate through gestures, expressions, and movements. Today, mimes are often comedic, but originally they may have had a deeper meaning. Researchers believe prehistoric humans performed rituals like these to strengthen bonds within a community. They would impersonate animals and mythical creatures, telling stories without speaking. This would have been a way to share knowledge and beliefs while having fun and bonding together. Caveman Olympics. Today, the Olympics bring people together from around the world to compete against each other in various athletic events. But organized competitions have been around long before the modern Olympics. In 2017, researchers in Slovenia discovered clay tokens dating back 52,000 years. These were awarded to winners of competitions. The items were likely used as prizes because they were rare, having to be transported from far away. While we don't know for sure what the games were, the objects suggest that there was a competitive aspect to caveman culture. Evidence also suggests that cavemen loved to jump rope. Anthropologists found a number of primitive jump ropes made of vines or animal tendons. Archaeologists also found human footprints preserved in volcanic ash in Italy, and some of those footprints appear to have been made while a person was skipping rope. It's also possible that cavemen played a game that's similar to dodgeball. A group of people would stand in a circle and toss a ball or rock to each other. Then someone would run into the center of the circle and try to grab the ball. If they got close enough, the others could pelt them with rocks, trying to knock them out. Of course, the game wouldn't be deadly. They wouldn't use sharp rocks, but it would still sting. And what about music? Singing and dancing have been a big part of human culture for a very long time, and researchers think cavemen likely enjoyed dancing at social gatherings. Flint tools found near what may have been a prehistoric dance floor suggest that cavemen even made musical instruments about 40,000 years ago. These instruments were likely simple and made of materials that were easy to come by, like wood, bone, or animal skins. And finally, some scientists believe cavemen probably liked to have a good old time. Many archaeological sites contain signs of butchery, including animal bones with cut marks and tools with meat residue. However, sometimes scientists find bones with strange markings. Some scientists believe these strange markings are actually butchering patterns left by ancient humans when they butchered a carcass after a successful hunt. In some cases, butchers removed strips of skin and flesh in geometric patterns, turning the hides into sort of a wearable blanket. In other cases, butchers decorated the skins by cutting designs into the fat below the skin. These decorated hides could have been used as cloaks or blankets, and in addition to keeping warm, they could have been used as a kind of wearable art. It's clear that cavemen weren't just a bunch of grunts who spent their days chasing woolly mammoths and their nights sleeping in caves. You might be surprised that just like modern humans, ancient hominids engaged in some pretty fun activities. And I'm not just talking about playing video games on your Game Boy in a hollowed-out log. The earliest evidence of play dates back at least 2.6 million years. This was long before our species even existed. Our distant relatives, the Homo habilis, played with rocks and other objects. Granted, they likely didn't have time for fun all the time because of the constant threat of predators, but they still made time for a little bit of enjoyment. Play isn't only good for keeping things fun, it also helps us learn new skills and become better problem solvers, which can come in handy when you're trying to survive in a prehistoric world. There's actually a hypothesis called the play-to-learn hypothesis, which posits that play is an important part of learning and development. In fact, researchers from the University of California, San Diego, have argued that play is so critical to our survival that humans evolved specifically to play, especially during childhood. Playing allows young humans to safely explore the world around them and learn new skills without risking injury or death. They also learn how to regulate their own behavior by taking on different roles and acting out different scenarios through play. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the ways that cavemen had fun, including playing with toys, throwing rager parties, and celebrating special occasions with feasts. As far as we know, cavemen never invented the wheel. It wasn't until about 3500 BC that someone got the idea to attach a wheel to an axle. That doesn't mean our primitive ancestors weren't rolling things around for fun, though. In 1934, archaeologist Philip C. could uncover some interesting artifacts in the form of balls made from stone and clay in a cave in France. These prehistoric balls date back about 15,000 years. They were too large to serve any practical purpose, so they must have been used for recreational purposes. The French archaeologist Brésilon de Saint-Martin hypothesized that these balls may have been used for a kind of ancient bowling. Balls would be rolled down a lane toward pins or another type of target. A similar game still popular today in some parts of Europe is called pétanque, or sometimes boules. Pétanque is played with a bag or sack filled with metal balls. Players throw these heavy bags toward a small target ball and try to get as close to it as possible. Some versions of the game have up to 6 players on each team, so it's entirely possible that early hominids played something similar to pétanque, except instead of metal balls, they used natural objects such as stones or clay. So unfortunately, we'll never know for sure what they were doing with these strange balls, since there's no written record from this time period. All we have are the physical remains and our imaginations. The oldest known toy ever discovered dates back about 70,000 years and was found in Israel. It's a small figurine of a female with exaggerated buttocks and hips. This prehistoric doll was probably used by early humans to mimic childbirth. Archaeologists also believe that figurines like this may have been used as fertility dolls to help women conceive. Speaking of dolls, according to Smithsonian Magazine, a bone flute made from the thigh bone of a young animal was found near a rock shelter in southern France. Researchers believe that this flute, which dates back about 50,000 years, was most likely used to play music during rituals or ceremonies. The discovery of these ancient instruments suggests that music has been a part of human culture for as long as our species has existed. A more recent find in the Blombos cave in South Africa seems to lend credence to this idea. Researchers analyzed pieces of ochre pigment that had been engraved with lines and geometric patterns. These markings date back approximately 73,000 years. Although the ochre pieces weren't found in close proximity to one another, researchers believe that the abstract symbols and cross-hatching indicate that our ancestors may have had a complex symbolic system that was used to convey ideas, including musical ones. In addition to making music, cavemen also loved to dance. Cave paintings throughout Europe depict people dancing in groups, holding hands and jumping up and down. Many of these images also show men and women dancing together. Dancing wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was a way to strengthen bonds within a community. Social dancing strengthens bonds between individuals and is an important part of growing socially and emotionally. This is true for modern humans, and it was likely true for cavemen as well. Another activity that helped our ancestors bond with one another and celebrate the triumphs of their community was feasting. Feasting is one of the oldest forms of celebration known to humankind. Archaeological evidence indicates that prehistoric humans came together in large groups to share food and engage in communal activities dating back hundreds of thousands of years. During the Pleistocene era, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and other hominid species held feasts to mark special occasions. These gatherings may have taken place during seasonal rounds of hunting or at places where resources were plentiful. According to National Geographic, the oldest site of a mass gathering of humans from the Stone Age is located in the Shula Cave in Israel. Over 10,000 years ago, 130 people lived in this cave. Analysis of the animal bones found at the site suggests that they hunted gazelle and other animals for food and participated in rituals and possibly religious ceremonies. The sheer number of animal bones indicated that the inhabitants of the Shola Cave regularly held feasts. Researchers believe that these feasts may have been celebrations of coming of age, marriages, or religious events. Some scientists think that early humans organized carnivals to reinforce social bonds and alliances. In these prehistoric party settings, members of different clans would come together to eat, drink, and celebrate. These events were important for maintaining social order and ensuring cooperation among different groups. Scientists have proposed that these festivals even served as a way to limit warfare. Ancient hominids didn't just feast on meat, they also enjoyed fruit. Archaeologists discovered the remains of a wild grape harvest in the Arava Valley in Israel. Wild grapes were picked, dried, and stored in clay jars about 8,000 years ago. The discovery of these preserved grapes means that early humans were processing and storing fruit for consumption during times of the year when fresh fruit was unavailable. This finding suggests that early humans had developed agricultural practices and were beginning to store food for future use. This practice would eventually develop into farming. Lastly, Let's talk about those famous cave paintings. Most of the cave paintings we've seen throughout Europe were created between 32,000 and 10,000 years ago. They're often colorful and realistic depictions of animals that were popular among the Upper Paleolithic people. Some researchers believe that these paintings were used for hunting magic. This theory was first proposed by the French archaeologist and historian Lucien Ligny in 1865. He believed that Paleolithic people painted pictures of animals they intended to hunt in order to improve their hunting abilities. Other researchers believe that the cave paintings were used for ritual purposes. According to the shamanistic theory, the cave paintings were created during trance-like states and were used to enhance hunting and healing magic. Whatever the case, creating art was a form of entertainment for cavemen. They likely enjoyed seeing their images brought to life on the cave walls, and perhaps they hung out by the flickering firelight, discussing who should paint next or what subject they should tackle. It's easy to think of cavemen as hairy, knuckle-dragging oafs who spent their days hunting woolly mammoths and their nights huddled around a fire trying not to get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. And sure, that's probably what they did most of the time, but that doesn't mean that cavemen never had any fun. In fact, anthropologists have found plenty of evidence that our hairy hominid ancestors liked to let loose every now and then, with some partying, dancing, and yes, even some drinking. Unfortunately, the only thing more fragile than a caveman's bone knife is their party foul record, since archaeologists haven't exactly been able to turn up many preserved examples of Neanderthal naughty behavior. So today, we're going to take a stab at answering a question that has stumped historians for years. What did cavemen do for fun? Before we get into it, be sure to hit that like button. We don't want your neighbor to beat you in the number of likes, do we? Also, stick around until the end if you want to hear about one historian's controversial theory that the ancient world was way more lit than we thought. If you were a caveman living in the Ice Age, it would have been pretty difficult to get drunk. That's because the process of turning grain into beer or fermenting fruit into wine requires specific tools and techniques that modern humans wouldn't even dream of needing. For example, early humans needed to grind grain between rough stones in order to break down its starches and sugars. But grinding grain is kind of difficult, so instead our thick-headed ancestors turned to other sources of alcohol, like fruit. The only problem was that there weren't many wild grapes growing in Europe during the last ice age. Luckily for them, there was plenty of another kind of fruit lying around, fermented horse apples. Yeah, really, just kidding. Those are actually called nut berries, but they've also been referred to as horse apples and monkey apples, which we think is a little rude. Anyway, nut berries grow on rowan trees, which have leaves that look like small hands reaching out towards the sky. They're very easy to harvest since they grow on low branches, and they look kind of cute too, except for the fact that they're poisonous when unfermented. Once they're fermented, though, all of their toxins go away and what's left behind is pure evil. In other words, pure alcohol. In fact, nuts berries are so high in sugar that they can produce wines twice as strong as modern Chardonnay. Now, you may be wondering why we're talking about wine on a video called What Did Cavemen Do for Fun? And that's because there's some evidence that cavemen didn't just drink alcohol. They made wine. Not only that, but they might have developed the art of winemaking independently from modern humans. Why? Well, because wine isn't just good for getting drunk, it's also good for staying alive. See, the fermentation process removes the dangerous toxins in fruits while simultaneously preserving the food's nutritional value. This means that people could safely enjoy nature's candy without having to worry about dying from eating it. So it's no surprise that archaeologists have uncovered plenty of evidence of early humans fermenting fruit across the globe. For example, they found traces of tart cherries in 9,000-year-old pottery from what is today northern Iran, as well as traces of grape wine in 8,000-year-old Neolithic jars from Hungary. Archaeologists have uncovered plenty of evidence of ancient humans burying their dead with great care, suggesting that they believed in an afterlife. But the truth is that nobody knows exactly what ancient humans believed about death. One popular theory is that early humans were animists, meaning that they believed the natural world was full of spirits. This would explain why they sometimes buried their dead with offerings of food and weapons, as well as why they sometimes built tombs in the shapes of animals. But it's impossible to say for sure what ancient humans believed about death, since we have no written records from before the invention of writing. Now, speaking of Neanderthals, there's a crazy theory out there that claims that Neanderthals partied harder than any group of cavemen. That's because in 1997, archaeologist Francesco Derrico unearthed a collection of animal bones from a site in southern France that he believed had once been musical instruments. Not only that, but he claimed that the bones showed signs of wear consistent with intensive use, meaning that the Neanderthals who lived in this area were not only musical, but downright rock and roll. But the rest of the scientific community wasn't so sure about this. They argued that the wear on the bones could have been caused by anything from gnawing rodents to weathering erosion. Eventually, DNA testing proved that the site in question was actually inhabited by modern humans, not Neanderthals. But what if Derrico was right? What if Neanderthals did have their own kind of rock and roll? Some experts think that they might have developed a kind of heavy metal music, which could explain some of their more violent behaviors. After all, mosh pits can get pretty rough and tumble. But what if Neanderthals took things to the next level and started engaging in ritualistic violence during their concerts? Some experts speculate that this kind of behavior might have contributed to their extinction, along with a few other factors. So while we can't know for sure what Neanderthals were doing for fun, we can be sure that they weren't making music, at least not the kind of music that we'd want to hear. Prehistoric humans probably had a blast playing games just like us. But while we like to play video games and watch sports, prehistoric humans preferred to play dice games and board games. For example, archaeologists have found evidence of a board game that was played in Europe as early as 15,000 years ago. It was called the Royal Game of Ur and was played on a board with 20 squares. All we know about the game is that it involved throwing 4 dice and moving pieces around the board based on the numbers that came up. But there's a lot that we don't know, like how the game was won or even what it was called. Other board games like Senet were more complex. The Egyptians played it on a board with 30 squares, and each square had a hieroglyphic symbol associated with it. The symbols represented different stages in the afterlife, and players moved their pieces around the board according to the rules of the Egyptian underworld. Basically, the entire board game was a metaphor for the journey that a person's soul went through after they died. Now, we don't know exactly what the Egyptians believed about the afterlife, but we do know that they believed in it. That's why they built massive tombs for their pharaohs and filled them with all kinds of riches. But we can also see evidence of their beliefs in their board games. For the Egyptians, playing a game wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was a way to learn about their religion. Prehistoric humans loved to dance, just like modern humans. In fact, we have plenty of evidence of prehistoric dances. For example, archaeologists have found skeletons that show signs of healed broken bones, which means that these people had danced themselves into a pretty good shape. But the most interesting piece of evidence comes from a series of cave paintings in France. The paintings depict human figures in poses that suggest they're dancing. And they're not just standing around waving their arms and legs in the air. They're engaged in a kind of dance that resembles modern ballet. In fact, some scholars believe that these cavemen were practicing a kind of prehistoric ballet. If that's true, then it means that they had a deep understanding of human anatomy and movement. But it also means that they had a sense of beauty and grace that we usually associate with modern ballet dancers. So while we don't know exactly what prehistoric humans were doing for fun, we do know that they loved to dance. And that's something that we can all relate to. There are so many questions we ask about our ancestors, the cavemen, like what did they eat, how did they live, and why do we still have to explain jokes to stupid people? Today I want to answer a really important question. What did cavemen do for fun? Now there is a big misconception that back in the day, life was just hard. You were constantly fighting off saber-toothed tigers or being eaten by them while you were sleeping. And sure, that probably happened. But let's be real. Those saber-toothed tigers didn't catch very many humans, and most of those that did were probably drunk. The truth is, our ancestors were probably more bored than anything else. There weren't many cars back then, and Netflix hadn't been invented yet, so people had to make their own entertainment. And a lot of that entertainment was pretty fun. So let's take a journey back to the Stone Age and see what fun was like before we invented iPhones. First off, Let's talk about one of the greatest party games ever played, Mammoth Hunt. Yes, that's right. The best time to play this game was during the summer. See, back in the day, there was only one air conditioner, and it was called Mammoth Hunt. This game was a lot like tag, except instead of getting someone's attention by lightly tapping them on the shoulder, you would instead kill them. And rather than saying "you're it" when you tagged someone, you would say something along the lines of "woohoo, you're going to die." Now I know that sounds violent, and it is. But let's be honest, if you were going to get killed by a woolly mammoth, you'd rather it happen during a game of capture the flag than when you're taking out the trash. It's all about perspective. Also, mammoths have really thick skin, so you needed quite a few stabby things to kill one. That's why a group of hunters would always play this game together. They would stab the mammoth as it ran away, and once it was dead, they could use its hide for shelter, and its meat for food, and its tusks for making really cool decorations for their cave walls. That's right. When our ancestors played Mammoth Hunt, it was a win-win situation. If they won, they got dinner and a new addition to their wall art. And if the mammoth won, well, it just died doing what it loved, running away from hairy naked people trying to stick pointy things in it. Cavemen also really enjoyed a good board game night. Back in the day, there wasn't much competition in the board game industry because nobody had invented Monopoly yet. So the best board game available was called Guess That Animal Skeleton. All you need to play is some animal bones, and then someone has to describe that animal without using its name. For example, one person might say, "It has fur, 4 legs, and says meow." Another player would then guess the animal, and if they got it wrong, they would have to sit in a nearby volcano until someone else came along and guessed the correct animal, at which point they would get to crawl out of the volcano and pull the red lever, winning the game. As you can see, this game requires a lot of critical thinking skills, so no wonder cavemen enjoyed playing it. Our ancestors also had a talent for storytelling. In fact, some experts believe that cave paintings were an early form of storytelling. One theory is that cavemen would gather around a painting and narrate a story that took place in that picture. Kind of like how today we watch Disney movies with a bunch of talking animals that never shut up. A great story will always be funny, sad, and exciting all at the same time. And stories often include crazy characters. I mean, have you ever met a hyena? They're hilarious. And I don't think that hyenas realize just how much hyenas crack up other hyenas. We humans have known this for a long time, and we've used it to make lots of people laugh over the years. I'm talking about the classic custard pie in the face joke. It's funny because we never get sick of watching someone get hurt, and it's even funnier when that someone is someone we don't like. Of course, cavemen didn't have access to pies filled with toxic substances, but they did have fruit, so they probably developed the fruit pie in the face joke. In fact, there's evidence that people have been throwing fruit since before the Roman Empire, and not just any fruit, specifically rotten fruit. According to a report from the Roman philosopher Pliny the Younger, rotten figs were thrown at gladiators during fights. If the gladiator was hit with a rotten fig, he had to stop fighting and spend time cleaning himself up. It wasn't easy being a Roman gladiator. I mean, who wants to clean themselves up after being hit in the face with a rotten fig? Not to mention having to fight in front of thousands of people, getting covered in blood and guts, and occasionally being set on fire. I guess if you had to pick a job where you'd get hit in the face, being a gladiator is probably better than being a comedian. But either way, getting hit in the face with a fruit is just plain silly. And that's why it's a joke that stands the test of time. Playing pranks on your friends is another activity that both cavemen and modern humans enjoy. Humans love messing with each other's heads, whether it's telling someone that their fly is down or blaming them for sending a weird email to your boss. Some of the best pranks are ones that make your friends look foolish in front of others. And cavemen were no strangers to that kind of humor. Just imagine you and your friends hiding in some bushes, waiting for that one guy who always boasts about how brave he is. And when he walks past, you jump out and yell, "Boo!" and he runs away scared. Everyone laughs, including him, because everyone knows that he'll tell everyone tomorrow how he almost got scared to death by some overgrown, hairy children. But you got him back, so it's all good. Pranks like this not only make people laugh, but they also help us cope with stressful situations. Imagine living in a cave and you're surrounded by scary animals outside, like a lion, a bear, and a hyena, but you got them all back. And that's why. No matter what culture or time period you live in, you should always bring a knife to a gunfight. Another thing that cavemen loved to do was stare at the stars and wonder what they meant. In fact, scientists believe that cavemen's fascination with stars is what eventually led to the invention of calendars. Many ancient cultures kept track of time by following the patterns of stars and constellations. For example, the Mayan civilization created a solar calendar by observing the Pleiades star cluster and the winter solstice. The ancient Egyptians built their calendar around the flooding of the Nile River, which occurred annually when the river reached its peak. They used a 365-day calendar that consisted of 12 months with 30 days each. This was very similar to the calendar we use today. Unfortunately, we don't have very many records of what caveman calendars looked like, mostly because they were made out of animal bones and cave paintings, both of which break down over time. But scholars have pieced together enough information to learn that cavemen did celebrate certain holidays. The two most popular holidays celebrated by cavemen were the winter solstice and the spring equinox. The winter solstice occurs when the sun reaches its southernmost point in the sky, marking the shortest day and longest night of the year. The exact date of the winter solstice varies, but it typically occurs around December 21st or 22nd in the northern hemisphere and June 20th or 21st in the southern hemisphere. During the winter solstice, the sun appears to be at its weakest point in the sky, and many cultures believed that the sun was a god, so they celebrated this holiday as a way to honor him and to pray that he would become stronger again. The spring equinox occurs when the sun crosses the equator, which makes day and night equal in length. This holiday was celebrated by many different cultures around the world, and in some places people would have feasts to celebrate the return of spring and the promise of new life. And finally, one of the greatest ways to have fun is to poke sticks in holes. It doesn't matter if it's a bird's nest, a bee's nest, or someone's neck. It's always funny. It's also a great way to learn which bees are angry and which ones aren't. Bees don't like it when you poke sticks in their holes, and they have a very effective way of letting you know that. So there you go. Those are just a few of the ways that cavemen liked to have fun. Even though life was hard, they still found ways to laugh and enjoy themselves. And maybe that's the secret to happiness. It doesn't matter what you have to endure. What matters is how you choose to respond. So next time you're feeling down, just remember, it could be worse. At least you're not living in a cave and getting chased by wild animals every day, unless you live in a zoo, in which case, sorry, but you're screwed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss out on any of my videos.